real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Meet the Parents podcast, where every week we bring you a mix of real parents and real stories. Now, we were going to be recording this on Mother's Day, so we decided to give all the mums on the team the night off. So tonight it's just me, Tim, with my partner in crime, Dave the Dadventurer. Evening, Dave.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So, I was trying to think which famous pairing the two of us most closely resemble. I'd like to think we could be easily mistaken for, Batman and Superman, or the Flash and Green Arrow. Actually, the Green Arrow would be good. I'm not bad at dots. But I suspect we'd probably look like that old Only Fools and Horses special, where Del Boy and Rodney were dressed up as Batman and Robin. So I guess that makes us a right pair of plonkers.
Very true. I'd go along with that.
So anyhow, seeing as it's just the two of us in the house tonight, I thought we'd take a look at the dad's perspective on parenting tonight. So this episode is all about a dad's life. Let's start with a bit of background about ourselves. So I guess if I start with me, my background is that I've always worked in the business world. So I started out as a marketer pushing small bits of paper around and have gradually worked my way up the corporate ladder with a variety of companies, including the retailer for whom every little helps, and a large media organisation, which is an anagram of the letters B, C and B. So what that means is that now I push slightly larger bits of paper around. Anyhow, the long and the short of it is that I've got a pretty standard office job, I guess, which means that I keep something approximating regular working hours. Now, it took us a while to get round to start trying for a baby, and quite a while longer until we finally succeeded in actually having one. But now we have 3, as readers of the blog will know. Isaac, who's 8, Toby, who's 6, and Cara, who is nearly 4, going on 14. Dave, how about you?
So similar to you, I started in the corporate sector. Having left uni at 21, I got a job with a large business consultancy firm and worked there for 5-6 years, living down in London. Before I decided I needed a change, I think I'd got to the point in the organisation where I wasn't going to get any further. And it was just doing my head in, to be honest. So I thought, what do I love? Where's my passion? And I managed to get a job within football, so working for a football stats company. Unfortunately, the MD, who I can call him a lot of names, but I'm not going to because this is a PG-rated podcast, basically lied to me loads, and I took the job, and then within 5 months the company went bust. So from that point I started doing freelance writing, mainly around football and betting, so staying within a similar area, until I got to a point where I could decide what I wanted to do. Fast forward from that point, so that was maybe 2.5 years ago now. I continued the writing, started going alright. We had a kid, so Elle, who's 19 months now, and as part of that we decided that I was going to be the stay-at-home dad, so I'd do that whilst doing a bit of writing still at the same time. So a little bit of a different life to what I had as a 24 year old travelling the country, working with all of these massive organisations and stuff, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, just a little bit different. So I guess if you cast your mind back to when Hay was pregnant, as a prospective father-to-be, how involved were you in all the decision-making regarding how Elle was born?
I was very involved. Pretty much everything that we talked about and we decided was done as a pair. It's sort of just how me and Hayley do everything in life. So when it came to things like going to midwife appointments or going to the hospitals or NCT, it was never going to be a question that I wouldn't be involved and that I wouldn't be going along. Obviously being freelance at the time helped because it meant I could take the time to go and do things like that.
Yeah, and I guess we were quite similar, I think. I was involved in most of our decisions regarding Isaac's birth. Although I have to admit that in a lot of cases, there were a lot of things that I didn't feel particularly strongly about, and I was generally kind of pretty happy to run with Heather's preferences, given that, A, she did have some pretty strong feelings, particularly about wanting a home birth rather than the hospital one, and B, we're mostly of a pretty similar mind anyway, which always helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What was it like for you in those final few weeks before the birth? Because Elle arrived a little bit on the early side, didn't she? So had you started making any changes or preparations to your routines?
Not really, if I'm honest. I think, as you say, she was 2.5 weeks early, so I think we were in that stage of starting to wind down and prepare for the birth, and then all of a sudden, click your fingers, she's there. It all came really quickly and quite sudden. Hayley hadn't actually even finished mat leave at the time. She was still at work, and the day that Elle was born was actually the day that she was supposed to be starting maternity leave, so that's pretty decent timing to maximise it, isn't it? But yeah, that day when Hayley had her first contraction, we'd had friends round, we'd had something to eat, we'd been on a walk with the dog. It was just a very normal day. And then the contractions kicked in, and then I think, 3-4 hours later, Elle was born, and then we were home within 12 hours. So we didn't really have time to sort of change our routine to an extent.
Wow, that really is quick, isn't it? I mean, what was that day like? It must have been pretty frenetic.
Yeah, it was. It was, it was sort of 10, 11 at night. We'd just sat down to watch Wolf of Wall Street. So I think it might have been Leonardo DiCaprio, which helped get the kid out. Yeah, it was a strange one. I think because everything happened so quickly, we didn't really have time to think about it and sort of take it in. It just happened, and we went with it.
And I suppose we probably ought to clarify that L doesn't stand for Leonardo, does it?
Well, it could do. That's a secret that people will have to keep guessing.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember first time round, we were super keen and super organised, and we were almost at the other extreme because Isaac ended up being 12 days late. Now I think we must have had our hospital bags packed and ready to go from maybe 33 or certainly 34 weeks onwards, and because we were planning a home birth, we actually had 2 sets of bags packed. So there was the one that we were hoping to use at home, and then another one that stayed in the car just in case I ever needed to go straight to hospital from work without coming home first. So I remember that last month or so, I was basically at DEFCON 2 the entire time. and it had gotten to the point where I was deliberately cancelling any work-related travel that required me to be more than, an hour or so away.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was constantly leaving the office every day with a kind of jaunty farewell of, I might see you tomorrow, but I might not. Which gets incredibly wearing on all concerned once you've passed the due date. I
bet they wondered whether you was even expecting a kid, and they were just thinking that you were making that up so you could leave the office on a high note.
Yeah, well, I'd kind of come in the morning and be like, oh God, you again.
Well, that's the thing. You just don't know when it's going to happen, do you? It can happen at any time, and you've just got to plan your life around anything happening at any point.
Yeah, no, that's right. And of course, the worst thing is that when you're expecting and you never know that you might need to jump into the car and drive to the hospital at a moment's notice, you have to be sober enough to be prepared to drive, which is pretty ironic given that period preceding a child's birth is really the sort of time when you really need a beer. That first time round was as stressful as anything. We were super organised, super prepared, super worried, read all the books, all the stuff that you do before a first child is born. And second time around, and particularly third time around, it was a bit more whatever, we'll pack the bags at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about after Elle was born? Now, in terms of work, you were already freelancing at that point, so I guess you didn't have to apply for paternity leave as such. But what did you do following her birth?
Yeah, so as you say, didn't need the paternity leave aspect, but what we decided instead was to basically use our savings as sort of like a fake paternity leave. We'd already decided that I'd be the stay-at-home dad when Hay went back to work after sort of 9-10 months, so it was just about using our savings for us both to be around. Which was great because it meant that we could do everything together as a new family. It meant that we didn't get stressed out because if, say, Elle was crying, then Hayley could pass her over to me or vice versa. It was really the best thing we've ever done. I know that not everyone can be in a position like that, but I like to think that the working hard during my early 20s meant that we was able to put the savings there to benefit us later in life and give us that option of doing it that way.
And I guess you've got no regrets at all about doing that, have you?
No, not in the slightest. It was from a dad perspective. You hear so many stories about dads who don't even take any paternity leave or can only take a week because the family physically can't afford it. So having the luxury of being able to be at home with Hay and Elle and spend that time together as this new family was great. Yeah, so no regrets whatsoever.
Yeah, and I guess I had a more traditional approach, I guess, in that I at least was fortunate in that I had the option of taking 2 weeks fully paid paternity leave, which obviously I took. And when Isaac was born, he was born in early December, so that basically took us up to only a few days before Christmas. So I then just took a couple of weeks regular holiday on top of that. So basically I had an entire month off. And I can tell you that going back to work after that was a bit of a shock to
I can imagine.
I guess second and third time around, again, things got a bit more, a bit less pressured, a bit more relaxed. So with Toby, I did take the 2 weeks paternity leave, but I wasn't quite as detached from work. So, I was checking emails every day and that kind of thing. And then with Cara, I did take my 2 weeks, but I was going into the office a couple of days a week and spending an hour or two most other days working at home because things were just a little bit easier by then. If we ever had a fourth child, which we won't, I would probably just cut out the middleman, take a sleeping bag to the office instead for a little bit of peace and quiet. Yeah, I'd just like to point out that I'm joking, of course. I'd book a hotel room instead of taking a sleeping bag. When both our kids and when Elle was born, there was no option to take this new shared paternity leave. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think we're still somewhere off coming to this sort of equality perspective. There's still very much the view that mums are the ones that are needed during the early weeks and early months, which I do agree to some extent, especially if it comes to breastfeeding and the whole nurturing aspect. But I've been around all of that time as well, and I'd like to think that you'd think that I played a critical role in that. So there is a role for dads. Allowing this maternity leave to be split due to the shared paternity thing is like I say, it's a good step. More could be done, but we're still at a point where there's not really much uptake. There's not that many people out there doing shared paternity.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what the stats are in terms of the uptake in dads taking that shared paternity leave, because I think you're probably right. I guess it's not necessarily been something that's had a huge uptake from new dads.
Yeah, there's two people who I'm speaking to at the moment. It's something which I'm looking to do on my blog at the moment, about sharing some experience of shared paternity leave. So watch out for that.
Yeah, definitely, because I think it's a big leap into the unknown for anyone, isn't it? Because there's so little history or shared experience. So I think anything that opens people's eyes to what the reality of it and some of the positives as well as some of the potential negatives.
Yeah, exactly.
The more information we can get out, the better. And yeah, I mean, looking at it from my perspective, I think even if I had the option of taking shared paternity leave, I don't really think I would have done, because it would have meant sacrificing such a significant amount of income.
Yeah.
And then there's, I guess, the kind of the flexibility aspect of it. I think in an ideal world, what I would have liked would have been to have maybe had the option of working a 4-day week rather than a 5-day week for the first 3 months or so.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's still sort of territory that we're still learning about. So that these two people that I was talking about who are currently on shared paternity leave, one of them is so the mum's doing 9 months and then going back to work, and the dad's doing 3 months, I think. The other people have done it as different blocks. So I don't know the exact figures, but say a block of a month for the dad, then another block of the month 3 months later, and then another month. And they've gone travelling and things. So I think I don't want to use the word difficulty, but let's use that word. The difficulty is that we still don't really know what that looks like, and you've got to agree it with each employer individually, and it all comes down to what you're looking for and whether it meets what the employer wants. So even though the legislation's in place, it doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to get it still.
Yeah, and you make a good point, actually, because it's not just about it being a leap into the unknown for the parents. It's a leap into the unknown for employers as well. And trying to adjust to offer this kind of flexibility in a way that doesn't disrupt the normal course of business too much.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you've got a lot of companies out there that still don't recognise part-time work and flexible work, doing something like this is that step even further.
Yeah, that's right. And it's difficult enough even for mothers who've taken regular maternity leave and they're trying to return to the workplace, as we've talked about with Amy on the podcast before. So, yeah. Any new change like this is always going to be a challenge for all parties. So if we go back a bit, assuming you've not blotted this particular period from your memory, those first few weeks or first few months after Elle was born, what would you say was the biggest change in your life and routine?
Well, to be honest, I don't think things massively changed. Obviously, there was, the obvious things like lack of sleep and needing to figure out how to look after and what to do with, like, this little human that's now living in your house. But I wouldn't really say that things massively changed for us. And the fact that I was around as well, I think, provided a bit more stability and help in that regards.
I mean, for me, it's going back 8 years, so this really is the dim and distant past. But I think for me, the biggest change was just the way that our entire lives suddenly became subservient to the needs of this little crying bundle. It was like someone had taken the 5 or 6 hours that we were used to having together every evening and just disappearing it into a black hole, one filled mostly with poo and sick. Yeah, and I have to admit, I don't think in all seriousness I could have done what you did. What was it that made you decide to become a stay-at-home dad? What was the decision process behind that?
The fact that the company I was working for went bust obviously pushed that decision on us to an extent. During the sort of 6 months after that, like I said, I'd been doing freelance work whilst trying to figure out what else to do, and I'd had a number of interviews during that time. I was actually offered a job when Hayley was probably about 3 months pregnant. And that was the crux of the decision of what did we do. Did Hayley stay at home? Did I stay at home? Did we both work? Having sort of figured it out and thought it all through, we decided that the best thing would be for me to be the one that was at home. It was almost like the lesser of two evils to an extent.
Don't miss out. Ensure your child has the latest must-have accessory. The digitally automated doll. Dad for short. Dad comes in all shapes, sizes and colours to suit personal tastes. Not all versions are 100% reliable. Some models come with additional midriff spare tyre and chest-mounted airbags for comfort and protection. Economy models are powered by a low-cost combination of beer and kebabs. Get yours today. Warning: do not attempt to use Dad as a sex toy without protection. Please consult your doctor before use.
So that was then, and this is now. Now, so you've now been a stay-at-home dad for, it's coming up to a year, isn't it?
It is, good memory.
So what sort of things do you get up to in a typical week?
I've always sort of said that what I do is no different to what a stay-at-home mum does. In terms of the type of stuff we do, it's a lot of playing in the house, reading together, sort of messy play type stuff, going to the park, going to toddler classes. We do swimming and we do tumble tots on a Thursday and Friday. And it's just trying to then balance that with doing a bit of work, whether it's the blog or whether it's the freelance writing stuff. So yeah, that's what I tend to do on a daily basis, but watch out for the plug here, Tim. I recently did my first ever vlog on life as a stay-at-home dad, so if you're interested in what a day in the life of me and Elle looks like, then check it out on my YouTube channel.
And I guess, my week also has a fairly kind of dull and set routine to it. I mean, I'm usually around to say goodbye to the kids in the morning, and I make a point of trying to be home in time for bedtimes at least most nights. And my work arrangements are also flexible enough that I can occasionally walk the boys to school, and I do some evening pickups and that sort of stuff. And then at weekends we try to do more stuff as a family together.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You've just got to do what's right for your family, whatever that is.
Yeah, how tricky do you find it to fit your blogging and your other writing work around, Elle?
It's a challenge as the blog sort of gets bigger. Not meaning to be big-headed about it or anything. so does toddler Elle. So she becomes more demanding, just as PR companies and other people wanting my writing services become more demanding too. So trying to juggle all of that's quite difficult. I'm not any point where I have got that balance right. It's just trying to deal with what's in front of me and try and work to the deadlines where possible.
Yes, I mean the challenges are in many ways similar to what a working dad would face, or as you say, what a stay-at-home mum would face. But they're just different variations on the theme, aren't they?
Exactly. How about you? Because I know that you've got like 20 podcasts and 400 blogs and a full-time job and 12 kids and all of this stuff.
Oh, hang on! Don't tell anyone about the other 9 kids.
Oh, was that a secret that I wasn't supposed to tell anyone at Britmans?
Yeah, it was a secret. Yeah, I just don't sleep very much. Yeah, it's a balance. I've become quite ruthless about things that I won't do now for the blog. There's never enough time to do all the stuff you want to do, so you just make the most of the time you've got, and you have to find that balance between, in my case, work and writing and maintaining enough time to spend with the family as well. So, yeah, it's always a tricky balance, isn't it? And I don't think anyone ever finds the perfect balance, but we all do the best we can, don't we?
Exactly, yeah.
Do you still feel that you're very much in the minority, being a dad who's the primary caregiver for Elle?
Yeah, I think I am. I'm definitely in the minority, but it's something that I embrace now. I think whether I intend to or not, I think through the blog and stuff like that, I'm sort of flying the stay-at-home dad flag now. So for me, it's important to try and change people's perceptions. If I'm at a toddler group or buying clothes for Elle or anything like that, which is the traditional mum thing, if I can just change one person's perspective, then to me that's sort of job done to an extent. Where I live is quite a, how should we say, a middle class area. So because we live in this type of area, there's a lot of mums around, so I'll go to classes and pretty much always be the only bloke, which I'm fine with now. There's a couple of dads around who are in similar positions, which is good, who I've met at classes before. So, for instance, this Wednesday it'll be 2 dads, 2 toddlers, and a bit of FIFA for a couple of hours.
Excellent. So hang on, how does that work? Is it dads versus toddlers? Because if it is, my money's on toddlers.
Let's just say without toddlers, a game lasts the amount of time it should last. What we've discovered, having 2 toddlers running around causing chaos, means that a 14-minute game lasts the best part of 2 hours.
Oh yes, I'm familiar with that particular phenomenon as well. So there was a report published just the other day by the Overseas Development Institute, which said that in the UK, men take on 32% of overall childcare responsibilities compared with 37% in Sweden and just 7% in Ireland. Now, did those figures surprise you at all?
They do a little bit. I'd say the 32% for the UK feels higher than I'd expect it to do, whereas the 37% for Sweden feels lower. There's a perception when it comes to sort of the likes of Scandinavian countries that they're doing things the right way when it comes to parenting. So the fact that they're only 5% more dads than the UK, to me, is quite surprising.
I was slightly surprised by that as well, because I think certainly a lot of the models that we're now trying to pursue in the UK are based on what happens in Scandinavia, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly. And it's surprising 7% in Ireland when, you're a stone's throw away from here.
That's a massive difference, isn't it? So I don't know exactly how they calculated the percentages, but yeah, I mean 32% in the UK versus 7% in Ireland is enormous. Now the report makes a series of recommendations that are supposed to help parents across the world cope with the demands of care and employment. They're quite broad recommendations. I don't think anyone would argue against any of them in principle, but is there anything else that you would add to those yourself?
I think we're seeing more and more dads involved in things, so I'd just like to see that continue. From my experience, I think the naming conventions do nothing to encourage dads. So mother and baby groups, for instance, where does a dad fit in that? From a naming thing, why is it not parent and dad? So I think there's education to be done with certain organisations around how you call things and how you name things. We also went to NCT classes before Elle was born, and my experience of that was almost like the focus was on the mums and the dads were just sort of making up the numbers to an extent. So I think there's potentially some work to do there around dads and how they can be involved more and what they can do. And I know, is it Daddy Natal has got his own dad NCT-esque classes set up. So, I think the more things we see like that, the better.
Yeah, and I guess, we're not here talking about advocating mother care changing their name to parent care or anything like that.
No, exactly.
But you're talking about kind of almost small labelling changes that actually could make quite a big difference in terms of signifying that certain issues are about parents rather than just about mothers.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's so many things out there that can automatically make people think they're not included and they're not wanted. And from my experience, a lot of people say, well, that's not the case, it's just a name. But that name, if it stops people going to things and being involved as a dad, it takes very little to use the word parent rather than mum or mother, in my opinion, and I think that's a quick win that could be used.
And even anecdotally, I've had exchanges with a couple of relatively new dad bloggers in the last few weeks who have expressed surprise that dads are eligible or invited to come to events such as Brit Mums Live just because of the name. And again, we're not advocating that Brit Mums changes its name to Brit Parents because, frankly, that's a crap name. But but it does show the importance that having a label that appears to be specifically about mums can have on dads in quite a negative way.
Exactly, particularly in an area which is very dominated by mums and always has been. So if that changes to happen, it needs to change with little bits like names.
Do you think that at any point in the future you might change your current arrangements and stop being a stay-at-home dad?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think a lot of that depends on whether we have a second kid, which isn't on the agenda at the moment, so no blogging exclusives there to anyone. I think the plan would hopefully be for Hayley to continue doing a good job at work, get the promotion, mean that we get more income in. For me, the blog continues to go from strength to strength, which brings in some finances that way.
Yeah.
And then Elle would be going to school as we have another second kid. And then I'd probably continue the stay-at-home dad reign because it's what I've been doing and makes sense. So I think that's the goal. Obviously, at some point in the future, we can't keep knocking kids out all of the time. So I'll have to think about what happens. Do I go back to work? Do I take an early retirement? But yeah, I think it'll stay how it is for the time being.
Yeah, and I guess the flip side of that decision potentially down the line is that at some point circumstances might change and you might want to re-enter the world of work. Now, Amy's spoken at length about the challenges that she has faced trying to return to work after her maternity leave, but I guess there would be similar challenges facing a dad who's returning to work after an extended period away. There's that prospect of perhaps having to return to work, I don't know, 3 to 4 years after leaving the corporate lifestyle. Does that worry you at all?
It's in the back of my head somewhere, but I'm trying not to think about it at the moment. I think there's plenty of years before I need to think about that. I guess from a gap on your CV perspective, the freelance writing and the blogging and all of that does cover that gap to an extent. So I'm sort of viewing it as if that continues to develop as it is, then who knows, that could be my job in the future. Yeah, I think there's definitely a challenge which is often focused on mums about going back to work, but it definitely rings true to fellas as well.
And I guess this is where it goes back to our discussion a little while ago about employers needing to make adjustments and changes to a very different dynamic with both mothers and potentially dads coming back either from a period as a stay-at-home dad such as yourself or coming back just from shared paternity leave, and how companies adjust around that, because it's a very different environment to certainly what it was when our parents were working, when things were much more or much less flexible and much more rigid.
Exactly.
And, it's funny, even as a working dad, having had kids has had undeniably an influence on some of my career choices. Pre-kids, I routinely worked 11, 12-hour days. I worked evenings, I worked weekends. But, post-kids, I keep much more family-friendly hours. And, I asked not to be considered for any European jobs or anything that required significant amount of travel while the kids were still small and all that kind of stuff. And,
yeah.
And if I'm being honest, that has limited my career options somewhat. But I'm kind of okay okay with that. You know, I could probably be earning a few £1,000 more in a slightly more senior job, or maybe in a different company, but I made my choice, and I'm happy with the fact that that's allowed me to spend a decent amount of time with my kids during their formative years. And it's only really now, where we're about to hit that milestone where Cara starts school in September, that I've kind of stuck my head back above the parapet and opened myself up to, potentially a slightly broader spectrum of jobs.
Yeah. As we've said, I think it's all about the balance, isn't it?
I guess we'd better wrap up and move on. So there you have it. It's a bit of insight into the lives of both a working dad and a stay-at-home dad. So now we're off to the pub. Only joking. So before we go, what else have you been up to recently, Dave?
Not a lot. It's been quite a quiet 2 weeks. The only sort of thing of note is that we had our first child-free night away from Elle ever. So that was the first one in 19 months, which was quite nice. Went up to North Yorkshire and stayed in a hotel, dropped her off with my folks. So that was good because they got the chance to look after her and spend some time with her, and we got the chance to do what adults do with no kids around.
Yeah, and at this point we'll draw a line under that because this is, as you said, a PG podcast. But I think that's great. I think it's easy to forget each other when you're so involved around kids, and I'm the worst example of this because in 8 years since we've started having our kids, the two of us have yet to manage a night away. So well done, you.
Oh, Tim.
But what have I been up to? I've had a fairly quiet week or two as well, I guess. We've just come back from having split up for Mother's Day. Not split up like
I was going to say, from splitting up, that's quite big news that you've just thrown in there at the end.
No, Heather travelled down south to see her mum, while I went to London to have lunch with my folks. So we kind of covered off both mothers on the same day. But yeah, other than that, pretty quiet. I have even managed to make some much needed progress on my book, which means I might now actually complete it this side of the next ice age.
Wow, good work. So does that mean you've got a title and then written by Tim Liu on it?
All that means actually is that I've chosen what font to write it in. At some point I might actually write some words. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back for more chat next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online. So, Dave.
I am at thedadventurer.com and on Twitter at @the_dadventurer.
Oh, that's so much smoother than Julian, who can't even remember his own URL. And I'm at ThatchamDad on Twitter, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. And do please give us a follow on Twitter at ParentsPodcast, and on Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. Also, if you're on iTunes, do please spare a minute or two to give us a rating and a review. We would really appreciate it. So, thanks very much for listening, and we hope you'll be back to join us again next week. Good night.
Thanks, Tim. Always a pleasure.